The Galactic Council chambers fell silent as Admiral Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously against the crystalline podium. Around the massive circular hall, representatives from 47 different species watched the holographic display with growing unease. Earth hung there in the center, a blue marble that had become the source of their greatest miscalculation in 10,000 years of galactic dominance. "The humans have broken free," Zexthara announced, his voice echoing through translation devices that converted his chittering into languages across the known galaxy. "All 17 slave colonies have been liberated. Our forces are in full retreat." A collective hiss rose from the serpentine delegation. The Void Walkers' dark forms shimmered with agitation. Even the crystalline Mentari, usually emotionless in their logical perfection, showed stress fractures along their translucent surfaces. Counselor Yeath of the Draconian Empire slammed his scaled fist against his seat. "Impossible. Humans are primitives. They barely mastered interplanetary travel when we arrived. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours." "Was," corrected Admiral Zexthara grimly. "Their advancement rate is unprecedented. In the 50 years since we began harvesting their people, they've somehow leapfrogged millennia of technological development." The holographic display shifted, showing battle footage from the recent liberation of mining colony Zerion 7. Human ships, sleek and deadly, moved through space with impossible grace. Their weapons tore through energy shields that had protected galactic fleets for centuries. But it wasn't just their technology that had evolved. "Look at them fight," whispered Counselor Vash, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "They move like they're dancing with death itself." The footage showed human soldiers in powered armor moving through the colony's corridors. They didn't just fight to win, they fought with a fury that chilled even the most battle-hardened species. Every step was calculated, every shot was precise. They moved through enemy positions like water flowing around rocks, unstoppable and fluid. But what truly terrified the assembled aliens was how the humans treated their rescued people. The freed slaves weren't just liberated, they were embraced, healed, and given purpose. Children who had never seen Earth were welcomed as family. Adults broken by years of forced labor were rebuilt, not just physically, but spiritually. "They don't just rescue," observed the ancient Mind-Weaver elder, his psychic voice touching every consciousness in the chamber. "They heal. They restore what we broke. This is not merely military prowess. This is something far more dangerous." Admiral Zexthara nodded grimly. "Our intelligence suggests they call it humanity. It's not just what they are, it's what they do. Every species they encounter, they try to understand, to connect with, to elevate." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. For millennia, the galactic community had enslaved species after species, viewing lesser civilizations as resources to be harvested. They had perfected the art of breaking spirits, of reducing proud peoples to mere tools for their expansion. Then they had found Earth. The planet had seemed perfect. Rich in resources, populated by a species that had barely left their homeworld, and showing promising signs of adaptability and intelligence. The invasion had been swift and efficient. Millions of humans were taken, scattered across the galaxy to serve in mines, factories, and research facilities. What the aliens hadn't understood was that humans possessed something none of them had encountered before: an unbreakable bond to each other that transcended genetics, geography, and even time. When humans were scattered across the stars, they didn't break. They adapted. They learned. They plotted. "The Proxima Station incident should have been our warning," Admiral Zexthara continued, calling up another holographic display. "When the humans there revolted, we assumed it was an isolated rebellion. We were wrong." The display showed the mining asteroid where it had all begun. A group of human slaves had somehow built a transmitter from scrap metal and mining equipment. The signal they sent wasn't a call for rescue. It was a lesson. Technical specifications, star charts, and most importantly, a message that spread like wildfire through every human community across the galaxy. We are not forgotten. We are coming home, and we're bringing friends. That was the moment everything changed. Humans in slave colonies began looking at their alien captors differently. They studied their technology, not with the eyes of servants, but with the calculating gaze of engineers and scientists. They watched guard rotations not with fear, but with tactical assessment. They learned our weaknesses by serving us, Counselor Yith growled. Every species that enslaved them taught them something new. The crystalline taught them about energy manipulation. The Draconian Empire showed them military tactics. The Void Walkers revealed the secrets of faster-than-light travel. And they shared everything, added the Mind Weaver Elder. Unlike us, they didn't hoard knowledge for advantage. Every discovery made its way to every human community. Their collective intelligence grew exponentially. The escape from the Beta Centauri research facility had been the first sign of their true capabilities. Humans there had not only broken free, but had somehow convinced 3 other enslaved species to join them. When rescue ships arrived, they found not just empty cells, but a fully operational research station run by a coalition of former slaves who had turned their captivity into a university. They didn't just escape, Admiral Zex Thara explained to the increasingly nervous council. They recruited. They inspired. They taught other species that slavery wasn't inevitable, that freedom was possible. The liberation of Colony Delta 9 had shattered the myth of galactic superiority forever. A combined force of humans and their alien allies had not only freed every slave on the planet, but had done so without a single casualty among the prisoners. They had somehow managed to neutralize every guard, disable every weapon, and shut down every security system simultaneously. How? Demanded Counselor Vash. Our security systems are quantum encrypted, biometrically locked, and AI monitored. How did primitives bypass defenses that took us millennia to perfect? Because we underestimated what they consider primitive, the Mind Weaver Elder replied. We built our systems to be technologically impenetrable. They used psychology, sociology, and what they call human nature. They convinced our own guards to help them. The horror of that realization spread through the chamber like a disease. The humans hadn't just broken their technology, they had broken their trust in their own people. Alien guards across the galaxy were now suspect. Had they been turned? Were they still loyal? How could anyone tell? But the final straw had been the liberation of the Omega Sector, an entire star system dedicated to breaking the spirits of the most rebellious slaves had not just been freed, it had been transformed. The humans had somehow convinced every single alien administrator, guard, and overseer to abandon their posts and join a growing coalition of liberation forces. They offered them something we never did, Admiral Zexathara said quietly. They offered them redemption. They showed mercy to those who showed remorse, and they gave everyone a chance to choose their side. The display now showed current intelligence reports. Across the galaxy, human liberation fleets moved with purpose and coordination that defied belief. They struck swiftly, freed everyone they could, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. But they weren't just hit-and-run tactics, they were building something. They're creating a network, observed Counselor Yith with growing dread. Every freed colony becomes a base. Every liberated species becomes an ally. They're not just rescuing their people, they're building an empire. An empire based on freedom instead of conquest. The most terrifying reports were coming from the Rim territories. Human diplomatic missions were contacting independent species, offering technology, knowledge, and partnership in exchange for nothing more than friendship. Species that had remained neutral for millennia were suddenly announcing alliances with Earth. They're doing to us what we've done to others, whispered Counselor Vash, but they're doing it with kindness instead of conquest. How do we fight an enemy that makes allies by helping people? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. For 10,000 years, galactic civilization had been built on a simple principle. The strong dominated the weak. It was efficient, logical, and had created the greatest empire in known history. But humans were proving that there was another way, and it was devastatingly effective. "What are our military options?" demanded Counselor Yith. Admiral Zexathara's mandibles drooped. "Limited. Every engagement has resulted in defeat. Their technology is now equal to ours, and their tactics are superior. But that's not the worst part." "What could be worse than military defeat?" asked the Mind-Weaver Elder. "They're winning the war of ideas," Admiral Zexathara replied. "Our own people are beginning to question why we enslave others. Efficiency reports are being challenged. Military officers are requesting transfers away from slave operations. Some of our colonies are even releasing their human slaves voluntarily, hoping for mercy when the liberation fleets arrive." The council chamber erupted in outraged clicks, hisses, and psychic static. The foundation of their civilization was cracking, not under military assault, but under the weight of a simple question that humans had somehow planted in every corner of the galaxy. Why do the strong have the right to enslave the weak? "We could attempt to negotiate," suggested one of the younger crystalline delegates, her surface flickering with uncertain patterns. "With what leverage?" snapped Counselor Yith. "They have our former slaves. They have our technology. They have the moral authority. What could we possibly offer them that they couldn't take by force?" "Perhaps," said the Mind-Weaver Elder slowly, "that is exactly the point. They could take by force, but they choose not to. They are showing us a different way to be strong." The implications of that statement struck the chamber like a meteor. The humans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating that victory without cruelty was possible. They were proving that strength didn't require the subjugation of others. "What do they want?" asked Admiral Zexathara finally. "What are their terms for peace?" The answer came from the chamber's central communication array. A message had arrived, transmitted simultaneously to every major galactic government. The sender was identified as Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Liberation Fleet. The message was simple, translated into every known language, and accompanied by documentation that proved its authenticity. "The age of slavery is over. Every sentient being deserves freedom, dignity, and the chance to choose their own destiny. We offer peace to those who embrace this truth and war to those who reject it. The choice is yours, but the outcome is inevitable. Humanity remembers its children, and we are coming home." The reckoning Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the massive fleet assembled before her through the reinforced viewports. Ships from dozens of species moved in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the marks of liberation rather than conquest. Each vessel told a story of freedom won through courage and compassion rather than fear and domination. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 more systems," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "The Calaxian Empire just announced they're releasing all human slaves and requesting immediate peace negotiations." Sarah nodded grimly. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council received humanity's ultimatum, and the response had been exactly what she'd expected: chaos, division, and the slow crumbling of an empire built on others' suffering. "What's the status of the holdout systems?" she asked. "The Draconian Empire and the Voidwalker Collective are still refusing to negotiate," replied her Chief Intelligence Officer, Commander Reeves. "They've formed a military alliance and are massing forces at the Nexus Gate. Intel suggests they're planning a final stand." Sarah felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. They were so close to ending this nightmare, but the last steps would be the bloodiest. The Draconians and Voidwalkers represented the old guard of galactic civilization, those who would rather die than admit their way was wrong. "Ma'am," interrupted Communications Officer Park, We're receiving a priority transmission from the surface of Haven Colony. It's from the refugee camps. Sarah's expression softened. Haven Colony had been one of their first major victories, a former slave processing center that they'd transformed into a sanctuary for rescued humans and their alien allies. The transformation had been miraculous, but also heartbreaking. Many of the humans they'd rescued bore scars that would never fully heal. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Dr. Maria Vasquez, one of the leading specialists in what they'd come to call liberation therapy. Behind her, Sarah could see the sprawling camps that housed nearly 1 million former slaves from across the galaxy. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying both exhaustion and hope, "I wanted you to see this before you make any decisions about the final campaigns." The image shifted to show a group of children playing in what had once been a guard tower. Human children, Altarian younglings, and even a few young crystalline beings moved together as if they'd never known a galaxy where their species were enemies. They laughed in a universal language that transcended translation devices. "These are the children of slaves," Dr. Vasquez explained. "They were born in captivity, raised to serve, and told they were less than nothing. Watch what happens when you give them freedom." The camera followed one of the human children as she ran to a makeshift playground. There, a group of older teenagers from various species were teaching the younger ones to read using tablets that displayed text in multiple languages simultaneously. Sarah recognized the teaching method. It was pure human innovation, adapted to work with the diverse cognitive patterns of different species. "They're not just learning to read," Dr. Vasquez continued. "They're learning to trust, to hope, to dream of futures that extend beyond survival. Yesterday, a 12-year-old Altarian asked me if she could become a doctor. A doctor, Admiral. She'd never seen one who wasn't treating injuries inflicted by masters." The image shifted again, showing the medical facilities where Dr. Vasquez worked. Here, the true cost of galactic slavery was laid bare. Humans with neural implants designed to suppress independent thought. Altarians whose wing muscles had been surgically modified to prevent escape. Crystalline beings whose surfaces had been chemically etched to display ownership marks. "But watch this," Dr. Vasquez said, leading the camera to a rehabilitation room. Inside, Sarah saw something that made her breath catch. A young human man, his head scarred from where control implants had been removed, was working with an Altarian engineer and a crystalline mathematician. Together, they were designing something Sarah recognized as a revolutionary new type of faster-than-light drive. "They're creating together," Dr. Vasquez explained, taking the knowledge forced into them through slavery and using it to build something that could help everyone. They're not bitter about what was done to them. They're determined that it never happens to anyone else. The transmission ended, and Sarah stood in silence for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew waited for her decision. They all knew what came next, the final assault on the system still holding human slaves. It would be brutal, bloody, and would test every principle they'd fought for. "Admiral," Commander Reeves said quietly, "the Draconians have just executed 50 human slaves in response to our latest liberation. They're threatening to kill more unless we withdraw from their territory." Sarah's jaw tightened. This was the choice that had faced humanity since the beginning of their liberation campaign. How far were they willing to go to save their people? How much blood were they willing to shed for freedom? "Signal the fleet," she said finally. "We advance on the Draconian positions at dawn, but I want every ship captain to remember our protocols. We're not here for revenge. We're here for rescue." The bridge erupted in activity as orders flowed through the communication systems. Sarah watched the massive liberation fleet begin to move, each ship representing not just military might, but a promise made to every slave still in chains. The journey to Draconian space took 2 weeks, and every day brought new intelligence about what they would face. The enemy had learned from their previous defeats and had created what they called unbreakable defenses, minefields that adapted to incoming ships, energy weapons that learned from each encounter, and most horrifically, they had rigged their slave colonies with quantum bombs that would detonate if liberation forces attempted rescue. "They're willing to destroy everything rather than lose it," observed Commander Torres as they reviewed the intelligence reports, "including their own people." "That's the difference between us and them," Sarah replied. "They see people as property. We see them as family." The first contact with Draconian forces came at the edge of their territory. A massive space station, bristling with weapons and powered by the labor of 1,000,000 slaves, hung in space like a mechanical planet. The station's commander, General Krath, opened communications immediately. The Draconian appeared on their view screen, his scaled face twisted with rage and desperation. "Human Admiral," he hissed. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw before I detonate the quantum charges and send every slave on this station into the void." Sarah studied his face, looking for the tells that Dr. Vasquez had taught her to recognize. Fear masquerading as anger. Desperation hidden behind threats. The behavior of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling. "General Krath," she said calmly, "I know you can hear me. Not just my words, but the truth behind them. You're not a monster. You're a soldier who's been told that slavery is necessary for order, but you've seen our fleets. You've read our reports. You know that we've created something better." "Lies!" Krath roared. But Sarah noticed his claws weren't moving toward the detonation controls. "Your own intelligence reports confirm it," Sarah continued. "The systems that have joined us aren't falling into chaos. They're thriving. Crime is down. Production is up. Innovation is exploding. We didn't destroy your civilization, we improved it." On her tactical display, Sarah could see the human ships moving into position. But they weren't surrounding the station for assault, they were forming a protective perimeter. If Krath detonated those charges, they would contain the explosion and try to save as many lives as possible. "You want to save my station?" Krath asked, his voice betraying confusion. "I want to save everyone on it," Sarah replied, "including you. The age of slavery is over, General, but that doesn't mean the age of redemption has to be. You can choose to be remembered as the Draconian who ended slavery in your territory, or as the one who died defending it. Either way, slavery ends today." For a long moment, the communication channel was silent. Then, slowly, General Krath's scaled hand moved away from the detonation controls. What happens to me? To my people?" he asked quietly. "You help us free the slaves on your station," Sarah replied. "Then you help us design a transition plan that preserves Draconian culture while embracing freedom for everyone. You become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. The liberation of the Nexus station became a model for everything that followed. Draconian guards worked alongside human marines to safely disable the quantum charges. Former slaves and former masters sat in the same rooms, planning a future where both could coexist with dignity. But the most powerful moment came when General Krath himself removed the neural control collar from a young human engineer who had been forced to design weapons for 3 decades. "I am sorry," Krath said simply, the translator struggling with the emotion in his voice. "I was taught that your suffering was necessary. I was wrong." The human looked up at the towering reptilian general, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me remember my name." Word of Krath's surrender spread through Draconian space like wildfire. System after system began laying down arms, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The old order wasn't being destroyed, it was being transformed. The Voidwalker Collective proved more stubborn. Their dark ships emerged from quantum space like nightmares made manifest, their crews determined to fight to the last being. The battle that followed lit up 3 star systems and lasted for days. But even in the midst of desperate combat, humanity's principles held firm. When a Voidwalker cruiser's life support failed, human ships moved to rescue the survivors. When Voidwalker ground forces were trapped by their own falling orbital platforms, human Marines risked their lives to pull them to safety. "Why?" demanded Voidwalker Commander Nexus, as human medics treated his injuries aboard the UES Defiance. "Why save us? We came here to kill you." "Because that's what humans do," replied Dr. Chen, the ship's chief medical officer and Sarah's younger sister. "We save people, even people who want to hurt us. Especially people who want to hurt us, because they're usually the ones who need saving the most." The final Voidwalker stronghold fell not to weapons, but to something far more powerful. A broadcast from their own rescued slaves, former Voidwalkers who had been enslaved by their own people for showing weakness, compassion, creativity, and the desire for peace. "We are your children," they said in the strange harmonic language of their species. "We are your artists, your dreamers, your healers. You cast us out because we refused to embrace the darkness, but we never stopped loving you. Come home, come back to the light." The sight of their own people, healthy and happy and free, broke the last resistance of the Voidwalker collective. Ships began surrendering in such numbers that the Liberation Fleet couldn't process them all. But the real victory came in the days that followed, as former enemies worked together to plan a galaxy where every species could thrive. The Draconian Empire announced the formation of the first interspecies councils, where former slaves would have equal voices with former masters. The Crystalline Collective began sharing their mathematical knowledge freely, leading to technological breakthroughs that benefited everyone. Even the Voidwalkers began experimenting with art and music, creating beauty instead of fear. Admiral Sarah Chen stood once again on the bridge of the UES Defiance, but this time she was watching something unprecedented in galactic history. A peace conference where every chair was filled not by conquerors dividing spoils, but by former enemies working together to build something better. "Admiral," reported Commander Torres, "we just received confirmation from the Outer Rim. The last slave camp has been liberated. Every human in the galaxy is now free." Sarah nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried for longer than she cared to remember. But she knew their work wasn't finished. Freedom was just the beginning. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "We're going home. We're bringing our family with us, and we're going to show them what Earth looks like when it's ready to welcome the galaxy." The new dawn. 10 years had passed since the last slave collar was removed, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that even humanity's greatest optimists couldn't have imagined. The bridge of the UES Harmony, Earth's newest diplomatic vessel, hummed with activity as representatives from 47 different species worked side by side, planning the future of their shared civilization. Admiral Sarah Chen, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Freedom Alliance, stood before the massive view screen showing Earth in all its blue and green glory. But this wasn't the same Earth that had been invaded 70 years ago. This was a world reborn, expanded, and shared. Orbital stations ringed the planet like jewels, each one a fusion of human engineering and alien innovation. Draconian crystal farms grew in perfect geometric patterns, their energy feeding the planet's growing cities. Altarian sky gardens floated in the upper atmosphere, their bioluminescent plants creating aurora displays that could be seen from space. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers had contributed, their quantum technologies allowing for impossible architectural marvels that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science was still struggling to understand. "Ambassador Chen," called out Dr. Zara al-Rashid, the head of the Integration Council, "the delegates from the Outer Rim are ready to present their proposal for the new education initiative." Sarah turned to see a group that would have been unthinkable decades ago. Former slave masters and former slaves working together, their children playing at their feet while they designed the future. The draconian delegate, General Krath's daughter, was now one of the galaxy's leading experts in interspecies psychology. Beside her, a young crystalline being who had been born in captivity was revolutionizing mathematics by incorporating emotional patterns into quantum calculations. "Thank you, Dr. Al-Rashid," Sarah replied. "But first, I believe we have some special guests arriving." The main view screen shifted to show the approaching ships. These weren't military vessels, but something far more precious. The first graduating class of the Galactic Freedom Academy, returning from their tour of liberated worlds. Among them were humans who had never seen Earth, aliens who had been born free because of humanity's sacrifices, and most remarkably, the children of former enemies who now counted each other as family. "Incoming transmission from the GFS New Horizon," announced the communications officer, a young Altarian whose parents had been among the first to join the Liberation Fleet. The screen filled with the faces of 24 young beings, their species as diverse as the galaxy itself, but their expressions united by something that had once been the rarest commodity in the universe: hope. "Earth Control. This is Cadet Commander Maya Chen Vasquez, reporting successful completion of our diplomatic mission to the Andromeda Contact Zone," announced a young woman whose features combined human and Altarian genetics in a way that spoke to the galaxy's new reality. Sarah's heart swelled with pride and something deeper than love. Maya was her adopted daughter, one of the first children born to the freed slaves of Haven Colony. She had never known slavery, never experienced the fear that had defined previous generations. She was living proof that the galaxy could be better. "Report, Cadet Commander," Sarah replied formally, though her smile betrayed her maternal pride. "Ma'am, the Andromedans have agreed to join the Freedom Alliance," Maya announced, her excitement barely contained by military protocol. "They were initially suspicious of our intentions, given their history with galactic conquest from our region. But when they saw our crews working together, when they met beings who had been slaves and masters now serving together, they realized we were different," finished Cadet Nexus Prime, a young Void Walker whose harmonious voice had become legendary for its ability to calm even the most hostile negotiations. "Different how?" asked Dr. Al-Rashid, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who had spent her life studying interspecies relations. "They said they'd never encountered conquerors who brought gifts instead of chains," replied Cadet Scales of Justice, the young draconian whose diplomatic skills had apparently inherited the best qualities of both his warrior heritage and his liberated education. "When we offered to share our technology and asked for nothing but friendship in return, they didn't believe us at first." "What convinced them?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The school," Maya replied softly. "When we showed them the recordings from the Children's Exchange Program, when they saw former slave children and former master children learning together, playing together, creating together, they wept. Apparently, Andromedans have very strong family bonds, and they couldn't understand how we'd managed to turn enemies into family." The view screen shifted to show the recordings Maya referenced. Children from every species in the galaxy sitting in classrooms together, not just learning about each other's cultures, but creating new ones. Art that combined crystalline mathematics with human emotion, with draconian honor, with Altarian beauty, with Void Walker mystery. Science projects that solved problems through cooperation rather than competition. Most importantly, added Cadet Nexus Prime, they want to learn how we did it, how we took a galaxy built on slavery and conquest and transformed it into something based on freedom and cooperation. They're sending a delegation of their finest scholars to study what they're calling the human miracle. Sarah felt a familiar discomfort at that phrase. Over the years, various species had tried to mythologize humanity's role in galactic liberation, turning them into some kind of perfect saviors. The truth was far more complicated and far more beautiful. It wasn't a human miracle, Sarah said firmly. It was a galactic awakening. Humans didn't save the galaxy. We just reminded everyone that saving each other is what civilized beings do. With respect, Ambassador, interrupted a new voice from the communication array. You're being modest again. The screen split to show another approaching ship, this one bearing the insignia of the Galactic Historical Commission. The speaker was Professor Mindweave 7, a crystalline being who had dedicated the past decade to documenting the liberation wars. Professor? Sarah acknowledged with a slight smile. Still trying to turn history into legend? I'm trying to record truth, the professor replied, his crystalline surface flickering with the patterns that indicated scholarly excitement. And the truth is that humanity did something unprecedented in galactic history. You had every right to conquest after your victory, every justification for revenge after your suffering. Instead, you chose compassion. You chose to lift up your former enemies rather than tear them down. We chose to remember that our former enemies were people, Sarah corrected. People who had been taught that slavery was natural, that conquest was inevitable. Once they learned differently, they chose compassion too. The Draconians who guard refugee camps now. The Void Walkers who use their quantum technology to build schools instead of weapons. The Crystalline who share their knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. The choice to be better isn't uniquely human. But humans were the first to prove it was possible, Professor Mindweave 7 insisted. For 10,000 years, galactic civilization was built on a simple principle. Might makes right. You shattered that principle not through superior might, though you certainly developed that, but through superior morality. You proved that right makes might. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth's surface. President Martinez, a former slave who had been elected to lead Earth's government in the new galactic democracy, appeared on screen with news that would once have been impossible. Ambassador, we've just received a delegation from the Far Rim Confederacy. They're requesting to join the Freedom Alliance and they're bringing gifts. What kind of gifts? Sarah asked, though she was learning to be wary of surprises from distant civilizations. Technologies we've never seen before. Medical advances that could extend life indefinitely. Energy sources that could power entire galaxies. Manufacturing techniques that could end scarcity forever. President Martinez paused, his expression mixing awe with concern. Ambassador, they're offering to share everything they've learned over millions of years of development, for free, as payment for what they call the gift of hope. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Civilizations that had never even heard of Earth until recently were willing to share their greatest achievements because of what humanity and its allies had accomplished. The liberation of the slaves hadn't just freed individuals, it had proven to the galaxy that better was possible. There's more, President Martinez continued. Intelligence reports suggest that similar delegations are heading toward Earth from every corner of known space. Species that have remained hidden for millennia are emerging from isolation. Ancient civilizations are awakening from stasis. The entire galaxy is waking up. Sarah finished softly. They're all waking up to the possibility that they don't have to be alone anymore. On the main view screen, she could see the evidence. Ships of designs she'd never encountered before, moving toward Earth in peaceful formation. Energy signatures that defied current understanding of physics. Technologies that seemed to blur the line between science and magic. Ambassador, called out Dr. Al-Rashid, we're receiving transmission requests from 47 new civilizations. They're all asking the same thing. How do we join? How do we become part of this? Sarah looked around the bridge at the faces staring back at her. Humans and aliens, former slaves and former masters, children of war who had become architects of peace. This was what victory really looked like, not the defeat of enemies, but their transformation into friends. "Open channels to all incoming delegations," she ordered, "and prepare the welcome protocols, not as conquerors greeting the conquered, not as superiors addressing inferiors, but as family welcoming family, because that's what this galaxy is now, one great, strange, beautiful family." The communication array lit up with incoming signals as civilizations that had lived in isolation for eons reached out to touch the light of hope that Earth had kindled. Each transmission brought offers of knowledge, friendship, and cooperation. But more than that, they brought something that had been missing from the galaxy for so long that many species had forgotten it existed: joy. Young Maya's voice cut through the chatter with a simple observation that captured everything they had accomplished. "Grandmother was right. She used to tell me that humans were gardeners before they were warriors. She said we didn't fight to destroy our enemies. We fought to plant seeds of hope in the soil of despair. Look around, Ambassador. Look what we've grown." Sarah looked, and what she saw took her breath away. Through the view screen, she could see Earth surrounded by ships from across the galaxy, but also by gardens. Floating agricultural platforms where every species shared the techniques that had sustained them through their darkest times. Art installations where former enemies collaborated to create beauty beyond imagination. Scientific research stations where the combined knowledge of the galaxy was being used to solve problems that had plagued civilization since its beginning. "This is Fleet Admiral Chen Vasquez," Sarah announced on an open channel that reached every ship, every station, every settlement in the expanding sphere of freedom around Earth. "On behalf of humanity and our allies in the Galactic Freedom Alliance, welcome home, all of you. Welcome to the family." The response was overwhelming. Transmissions poured in from civilizations she'd never heard of, each one carrying the same message of gratitude and hope. But the one that moved her most came from an unexpected source: the former Draconian Empire, now calling itself the Draconian Republic. "From General Krath Rex, speaking for all free Draconians everywhere," the message began. "We have not forgotten the lesson you taught us. Strength is not measured by those you can conquer, but by those you can convince to stand beside you. Today, the entire galaxy stands beside us. Thank you, humans of Earth. Thank you for teaching us that enemies are just friends we haven't made yet." As night fell over Earth, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching the lights of 1,000 different civilizations twinkling in the darkness. Each light represented millions of beings who had been given a choice they'd never had before: the choice to be better, to do better, to build better. Beside her, Maya pointed to a particularly bright cluster of lights near the edge of the solar system. "What do you think is out there, Admiral? What other civilizations are waiting for their chance to join us?" Sarah smiled, remembering a conversation she'd had with Dr. Vasquez years ago in the refugee camps of Haven Colony. They had wondered then if freedom was worth the fight, if the cost of liberation would ever justify the price paid. Now she knew the answer. "I think there's a galaxy full of people waiting to come home," she replied, "and we'll be here to welcome them, no matter how long it takes, no matter how far they've traveled, no matter what they've done in the past. Because that's what family does. Family forgives. Family includes. Family never gives up on anyone." The last transmission of the day came from the deepest reaches of space, from a civilization so ancient that it predated the first galactic empires. Their message was simple but profound. "We have watched for 10 million years, waiting for a species to prove that intelligence and compassion could coexist. We are no longer waiting. We are coming home." As Sarah watched the stars, she realized that humanity's greatest victory wasn't the liberation of their enslaved people. It was the discovery that the galaxy was full of species waiting for permission to be kind, to be generous, to be family to each other. And now, finally, they had that permission. The galaxy had awakened from its long nightmare of conquest and slavery, and it was ready to dream again.